We are going to be talking about the third best Star Wars movie after The Last Jedi and Revenge of the Sith. We're going to be talking about Rogue One. That's what they call an introduction. My name is Wes. I'm joined by Clay and Dave. Dave, how are you? Long time no see.
Great. How are you?
Good. Clay, how are you?
I'm good. It's taken us over 2 years to do this because of all the reshoots we had to do.
You know that Gareth Edwards looks a lot like our friend Abe? Have you ever looked at Gareth?
Does he really?
No. He kind of looks like him in kind of a general sense, I suppose. But yeah, I was looking him up. He's apparently
I can see it a little bit.
Well, it probably depends on the picture, but his Wikipedia picture certainly resembles Abe.
A little bit. The first one I saw there actually. Oh yeah, this first one right here. He looks a lot like him.
Oh, just like him.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Gareth Edwards' Rogue One, a Star Wars story, which is almost like a Christmas story. It's a 2016 American space opera epic directed by Gareth Edwards, screenplays by Weitz and Gilroy, from a story by John Knoll and Gary Whitta. Produced by Lucasfilm, distributed by Walt Disney. It's the first installment of the Star Wars Anthology series. It stars Felicity Jones, Diego Luna, Ben Mendelsohn, Donnie Yen, Mads Mikkelsen, Alan Tudyk, Riz Ahmed, Jian Wen, and Forest Whitaker in a role that I have a lot to talk about, I suppose, when we get to it. But this is our first of the Anthology series because it's the first of the movies. We've done everything through Force Awakens, and now we're on to Rogue One. I had never seen this one before. You guys have seen it.
Yes. Yeah. We both saw it in the theater, right?
I saw it in the theater, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen it since then, and so I was really interested to watch it again because coming out of it the first time, I thought it was good, but I thought it was it kind of the last hour or so really kind of wipes your mind clean of everything that came before it. But I actually found it really rewatchable. I was surprised. I didn't think it was going to be, but I thought it was.
Dave, what'd you think? What was your initial your first watch back in 2016 when you were a young pup?
I saw it at like my most hatred for Star Wars. It came out after Force Awakens, but before Last Jedi.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was real down on Star Wars, and you opened by jokingly saying it was the third best Star Wars. I would say it's the fourth best Star Wars, and I'm going to stick to that. And I walked out of the theater thinking that too. I also saw this one without kids first. It was just me and my wife on a date. So I feel like that's less incentive to like it, but both of us walked out of the theater and I was like, that was really great.
Well, I can't wait to tell the story about seeing The Last Jedi with your kids, which is one of my favorite stories, but we'll save that for the next episode.
You just went home, David, had great sex. You're like, Star Wars is back, baby.
Did you see Tarkin? Oh my God, did you see Tarkin?
I actually do think this is the best, third best Star Wars, actually, after not the two that I mentioned, but after New Hope and Empire. I think this is easily into a third place for me. I had never seen it before, watching it last night. I really like this one. I think it has problems. I think it's an interesting mix of like what Star Wars does really well and really badly, and I think that they flesh things out nicely in this one. And I was I guess the main takeaway for me is that it feels like, I guess the big problem for me, besides like the character work, but on like a story level, is that I like how they flesh it out. I like how this is like a rebel story as opposed to a Skywalker type story, and you get like a sense of how the universe is treating people in terms of the rebellion and what the rebellion is like. And so they turn it into this kind of like war movie where it's kind of Vietnam with a lot of like guerrilla tactics, and it's kind of World War II and things like that. And where you're running into like the buzzsaw of like the German war machine or something like that. And
it starts in like Mogadishu and ends in Hanoi.
Right, exactly. It's a really globetrotter thing. But I think that the problem with that is that it's all kind of stuck in the Star Wars universe still. So while I really like the depth of what they try to do, and I think the ending is really fantastic, at the same time I have this fundamental problem of like, what is the Empire doing in this universe? Like, what is the Empire's goal? Why do all these people work for it? Like, what's the theology of the Empire? And I don't know if that's a good place to start, but that's kind of the tricky bit I had about this movie, which is like it's trying to go for this like really realistic war story, but at the same time it's stuck in this fairy tale of Star Wars that's holding it back a little bit.
Well, what's interesting is it kind of it kind of brings to the forefront the problem with the Empire across the board, which is they only seem to be able to know how to tell stories involving the Death Star, because there's the only thing that we know the Empire wants to do is build the Death Star.
Blow up planets.
Yeah, that's it. There's no like politics involved.
I was thinking, are they taxing these people? Like, do they take things from people under their control, or is it just like they steal the crystals in this movie? But is it like what's the Empire doing to people that makes them hate them? Really, it seems like everyone who hates them.
They blow up Jeddah pretty on a whim, essentially. But
it ties into the whole thing of just building the Death Star. It's like if you're not involved in them building the Death Star, you seem like you don't really interact with the Empire in any way.
Yeah, which explains why it's shown up in 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 9 movies, I guess. At least all of the movies that involve the Empire, it seems to play fairly prominently.
Getting bigger
because
and bigger.
we talked about this when we were covering the original ones, how the Empire is very much like an archetype and it doesn't really have a purpose. It's just sort of, it's the bad guy, they're doing bad guy things, and when you try to open it up, then you have to figure out what the Empire does, and it seems like they haven't really ever figured that out. It's just, well, as long as it's Death Star related, people will understand that they're up to no good, I guess.
Yeah.
The one thing I really like about the movie, and I'm going to tie it in, is it assumes that you've at least seen New Hope. And if you haven't seen New Hope, it doesn't give a shit explaining anything from A New Hope. It just you go into it and it assumes that you've seen it. And I think it makes sense. Like, the whole plot of the movie revolves around, if we're going to get back to the politics, the argument happens in A New Hope between Leia and Grand Moff Tarkin when she says, more the tighter you grip, the more systems will slip through your fingers, and Tarkin says fear will keep them in line, fear of this battle station. And that's like where you're going. Everything else is just assumed, right?
Yeah,
that's the driving political force behind the whole plot of Rogue One.
Yeah, and it does. They surprisingly don't explain a lot about from New Hope, but they explain a lot of everything else, because the first 40 minutes of this movie is essentially just exposition. My favorite piece being as they're getting ready for the final battle or whatever, Mon Mothma is talking to Bail Organa, and she's like, "You should call your friend, the Jedi." And he's like, "You mean the Jedi who I know, who's been in hiding for 40 years, that was of good help to me in the Clone Wars, named Ben Kenobi? Yes, I'll give him a call."
He's a good dude.
Like there's a lot of that, like the message that Galen Erso sends to his daughter is this hologram where he talks at length about the plot of Star Wars, essentially, where he's like, "I worked on the Death Star. I built a failsafe device in the middle of the Death Star that you can only get if you shoot 2 photon torpedoes." Oh, sorry, wrong one. If you shoot
proton.
Are they proton? Is that what
protons,
they are? Proton?
Yeah, protons.
Man, Wars, Trek, photon. If you shoot 2 proton torpedoes down the exhaust pipe, that's it's a lot of exposition.
Yeah,
but oddly enough, it's a lot of exposition. But the world building is actually, I thought it was actually pretty well done.
Yeah. No, I am. Edward started as a kind of prop person, I guess, for his career. He's known as someone who does like a lot of like physical design work, kind of like Lucas for the original series. He lists Lucas as like a big inspiration to him. And so you can see why it is like the world and the way that the movie looks and like the universe that they've put into it feels really, really Star Warsy to me in a way like the prequels don't. Like it feels like it picks up right after the original trilogy. And I think that like it kind of sticks out to me. Like I don't think that I don't think you need to have seen A New Hope to have watched this. We always talk about this guy where it's like now we're in the point where like this so much of this content is just like brand related that like if you need to know what's going on in it in order for it to stand alone on its like for you to be able to enjoy the movie, you need to be familiar with like the universe that they've done. And I think that this one does a pretty good job of being fan servicey and pandery, if you want to go that far, without it getting in the way of the story in a lot of times. And I think that that's a pretty good effect to it, where you don't spend the entire movie just going like, "Oh, that's a reference to that. Oh, that's a reference to that. Oh, that's a reference to that." It feels like it exists on its own even if it does take a while for the movie to start going in the early goings. It takes a little bit of time for it to sort of rev its engines up. But after that, I think it stands on its own pretty well, I think. But the downside of that is just, I think that my problems with this movie seem to be the generic ones. I don't really care for the characters all that much. And this one, trying to do its new war story, and I can ask Dave about this after the for his character take. When you're trying to do this new war story like this, the original Star Wars kind of worked because the characters are all very tropey. And it's like Luke is the young, naive teen who's going to like take on an empire. He's got his elder mentor. You've got the wisecracking sidekick guy. You got the princess. This one doesn't have that because it's trying to do this nuance thing. The characters are kind of they're not wishy-washy, but they're not clearly defined what they are. And because for some reason, there's like 5 times the amount of characters I think you need in this movie to get the job done. You don't spend a lot of time with any of them. But I don't know if you thought the same thing about these characters, Dave, or if you sort of, if you insert them into like a Star Wars trope and you feel okay with it.
Well, what do you mean that they're not defined? Like they're not defined as villains and heroes?
I think that you don't get I think that the movie wants you to assume their motivations and it doesn't feel the need to explain them. Where I think that someone like Jyn is not particularly well defined in what she wants from her, what she's going for as a character. And like the monks are just like these 2 monks who defend the thing and now they're going to join the Rebel Alliance. They have lines about like, we're also the bad guys. The rebels are also bad guys. Like everyone does bad things every once in a while, which is kind of a neat spin on it. But it doesn't feel. I don't feel like the movie ever gets into any of that because it's stuck in a Star Wars.
That is actually United States foreign policy now. I think, right? Everybody does bad stuff.
Well, I got to say that when I saw it for the first time, and every time I rewatch it, like I get my boner in the first 15 minutes when they have that scene where Cassian finds the informant and he learns, and then he ends up shooting stormtroopers, and the stormtroopers are gonna come, the alarms go off, and the informant says to him like, "Oh, I can't climb my arm," or something like that. Mm-hmm. And he says it's okay, don't worry, and then he shoots him in the back. That's when I was like, oh my God, moral ambiguity in a Star Wars movie. He just did something bad and he's the good guy.
Yeah. It's funny, Wes, I know what you're saying, but I find that the Cassian and Jyn are actually fairly well defined in terms of what they're about, in that Cassian is the guy who's going to do whatever it takes to get the job done for the rebels. And Jyn is very much kind of, I don't know if I'd call her a nihilist, but she's very much someone who is not taking sides in the war.
Yeah, which is a lot of the characters are kind of defined that way in this, right. That they're not interested in either side. Yeah. And
obviously the changes they go through is that Cassian realizes that, I don't know, life matters or something, I guess. But and Jyn decides to take a stand and blah, 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 blah. The weird thing is, so they're fairly well defined actually, but it's very much a 1-sentence definition, and they're just kind of boring. Like they have the one thing that they do until they do the other thing, and that's pretty much it. So you've kind of got them going through the middle of this movie, and they're just kind of floating along, and they've got the stuff with the dad and whatnot, but all of that's, I don't know if that stuff totally works for me, but like
there's a lot of characters in this movie.
There are so many characters.
Definitely.
Like the Saw Gerrera stuff. Yeah, you should go into that because
that
whole sequence, the brain squid. I think they could have taken the brain squid out of the movie.
Oh, I love the brain squid. I thought that was such a good addition to Star Wars. When he says that he can feel your thoughts, it's like, okay, it's a mind reader, and then he explains like, you're probably going to go insane from him reading your thoughts. That was great.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to leave Jyn because I think that I would sum up my like a big kind of problem I have is the ending. Where are these two falling in love through this story?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so? So they're just is there hugging? Is there hugging and stuff at the end?
They embrace.
Yeah, I think it's sensible. I don't think it's like they've spent the last 55 to, how long is 2 hours? 120 minutes? I don't feel like they've spent the story learning to love each other or anything. I think they've probably respect each other and stuff, but I don't think the point is that there is a romantic, story arc there.
No, I don't understand why they hug at the end. Kind of like
I mean, if you're facing down a nuclear explosion, I'm hugging whoever's
no.
next to me.
These are two cold soldiers. It doesn't make any sense that they're going to like. I think that's kind of the problem is that they're not really defined in a sense beyond like their one sentence description.
But they're not cold soldiers anymore by the end of the movie. Like they are, but I mean they've
But they're dying they're dying in the name of the cause. They're cold soldiers. Like they're dying for the greater good.
You can't hug someone when you're going to die for the greater good?
You absolutely cannot.
You can't look like a pussy.
You are a cold-hearted son of a bitch, Wes.
No, I don't think that they are, because they tried to add nuance to these kind of characters and they don't have the time to really flesh them out. You're left with a Star Wars-y sense that this is all because of daddy issues that you're doing things. However, it doesn't work well enough in the newly created nuance of everyone has a little bit of gray inside them. Like, who's to say which side is right in this thing, even though one side seems to be clearly right about it. So that's I think it all comes down to that central conflict about whether or not it's stuck in the Star Wars universe or you can do deeper stories in this universe and have it make sense at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. There's a lot of characters, and they do a lot of jumping around.
Yes.
Like I remember the first time I saw it. Afterwards, I think it was during the movie. My girlfriend was like, they changed planets like 4 times. I'm not even totally sure where they are at the moment.
In like 10 minutes.
Yeah, they do a lot of planet jumping.
They have to add chyrons so that you know which planet they're on. But they put the little name of the planets in the corner every time they do it. It's a new Star Wars thing. They didn't used to do that all the time. They used to stick on a planet and they used to just be on Tatooine all the time. And now they're just kind of jumping around willy-nilly.
Yeah.
So can I just say they used to be on Tatooine all the time? It seems like they're kind of still doing that with the new product that's out. But I thought that the opening planet when Jyn Erso's a little girl and Galen gets captured, that was a new Star Wars planet.
Yep.
Like I've never seen anything like that. And it was really interesting. If you look at the big shots, it's completely barren. And then you've got those moisture evaporator things and then grass growing just around those. It was very cool looking. I liked it a lot.
And the end too. When they go to Club Empire at the end.
Yes. What's that hotel in the Bahamas?
Sandals Star Wars.
Well, I'm surprised it wasn't
Atlantis,
just the layout of the Star Wars Disneyland, where it's like, this is what it's going to look like. Come to Scarif or whatever it's called.
It reminds me of a Mario Party map that's like on the beach, and it kind of reminded me of that, like jumping around between the islands and stuff. Yeah.
What we did learn, because Wes and I actually were also thinking the same thing, Mandalorian does not take place on Tatooine.
No, I think they say that I saw one episode.
Yeah, it's essentially Tatooine.
It's desert looking planet.
It's got Jawas on it.
It looks like Mos Eisley.
Yeah, the Jawas show up in episode 2.
Oh, nice.
Which again, when we were talking about it, I was like, how the Jawas aren't really a spacefaring people. I don't know how they get from planet to planet, but I guess they're very resourceful.
Would you you said this is your 4th favorite Star Wars, Dave.
Yeah, so I'd put it behind your same order, except flip Return of the Jedi with this. So
you'd put all the original trilogy.
I'd put Empire, New Hope, Return of the Jedi, Rogue One, Phantom Menace.
So why is this one?
No, I'm not going to get into that.
why is this one after those? I guess like what makes this one a good Star Wars movie for you?
So I called it moral ambiguity earlier, but it's not really. It's just kind of, I guess, the admission that irregular warfare, it's dirty war, right? And I like that, like the opening scene, or not the scene on Jeddah when they first battle, and Cassian says something like he feels it in the air, like it's going to get hot soon, and then a battle breaks out, and a bunch of civilians die from it.
And they look like Middle Eastern terrorists, essentially.
Yeah.
Yes,
like the good guys.
And it looks like they're, like you said, they're in Mogadishu or something. So I really liked that aspect to it. I liked the look of it a whole lot. It was really nice seeing like actual TIE fighters and X-Wings. Even the new ship, is it called a U-Wing?
I don't remember
whatever
it's called.
Rogue One the ship is. That was a cool design, and it was nice to see that. It didn't have the same curvy, sleek look that the prequels had, and it doesn't have the whole like New Order look of the new ones. It felt like a Star Wars movie. I thought they did a great job with it. Nothing really pissed me off, I guess. Unlike the prequels and the new Disney series,
Yes.
nothing made me mad.
You know what? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the thing that I think is the the biggest selling point for this is that they take familiar Star Wars stuff and they present it in a really engaging, interesting new way. Like that shot of the Star Destroyer, like sitting on top of Jeddah, just floating there. That shot's amazing. And there's a lot of stuff like that where they'll give you a really beautiful shot or sequence involving stuff you're familiar with, but it's just used in a new way. And it doesn't feel like they're using it just to use it. Like, the ATST shows up in Jeddah, and it's not like, but yeah, great, they use it. It's like, oh yeah, I guess they would have other practical uses aside from just Ewok warfare.
Yeah.
Like those are part of the arsenal. So it makes sense that they would show up in certain places.
The first shot you see of the Death Star when the shadow of the
so
moon or
good.
whatever is
So
passing over it and it comes into the light. That was awesome.
It's because they hit you with it twice too, because they do this. That shot starts with a Star Destroyer coming out of the shadow, and then the Death Star shows up, and yeah, that's probably the best shot in the movie. That's really great.
Good.
I was the only thing about your point, Clay. What are the AT-ATs? Those little four-legged walking things. I don't understand why they were in the Bahamas. It seems like that's not the right place for those two things to show up. But
or the forest, really.
Yeah, the forest.
What really is the practical application of the AT-AT or the ATST?
Just to be up high, shooting at things, making.
It was some defense contractor just ripping the Empire off.
Yeah,
that's what.
These will be great in the snow. Great in the snow.
I really like this movie because the main thing that I take away from it is that I have never, throughout all of the other Star Wars movies, ever felt that there was any kind of like fear of the Empire. That I think that this movie really gets across pretty well, even though I don't understand the motivations of the Empire still. At least in this one, it does feel like when you're removed from the Skywalkers and the Jedi and stuff like that, it does give you this sense of this is a real world where the default power setting is not Jedi. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
When you see a Jedi, and particularly when you see Vader in this, it actually lifts the power thing up a little bit. Like, you understand why these guys are impressive or why they're dangerous. But when you're stuck with these humans just kind of running around under the shade of the Empire, it feels more lived in a sense. Like, this is kind of where the prequels went wrong, where they didn't. That became too much of the soap opera about the Jedi. This feels like the Jedi are just something that lives on top of this world, and a movie like this gives sense to me about why some people, they insist in the other movies that people have not heard of the Jedi, kind of. Because you get the sense that they don't always just walk around and you're not constantly looking at them. You have this sense that this is a world that you might live your entire life without running into somebody with a lightsaber. Now,
I know, Wes, you're not really that much of a Star Wars person, but I would say Dave and I probably are more than you are. How do you guys feel about, does it work mainly because it is a nostalgia boost because they are using old stuff as compared to new stuff, or does it work because they're using that old stuff in a way that is actually actively satisfying for the story they're telling?
Dave can go. My answer is this is completely divorced from nostalgia for Star Wars because I don't have any of that. And I think that this works outside of that. Like, I think that it's not even the sort of fan servicey stuff. I think that this story is the most satisfying standalone story maybe of all the Star Wars movies because it sits maybe outside of A New Hope. This one like sits totally in and of itself, and I think that it has this really unique thing of the gloom that you know is coming at the end. Like, they can't win 100%. You know that something bad is going to happen. Adds a different flavor to the feeling of like what this fight is all about that you don't get in the other movies. So I think that it really just stands on its own and doesn't need the nostalgia to power it across the finish line.
Yeah. Dave?
Yeah, that question's too hard for me to answer for the opposite reason. I have too much nostalgia for Star Wars, so it's tough for me to separate it and answer that honestly. I'd like to say that the story works on its own, but I will say this. It was the first Star Wars movie my wife had ever seen.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's
Melissa
surprising.
had never seen any other ones. And when we walked out of the movie, I said I loved it, and she was like, "Me too. That was a great movie." So,
all right,
yeah. I think it's really. I liked it because it's so different from the other movies in a lot of really great ways. And what are the other anthology movies after this? Solo and
that's it.
That's it.
Just Solo, because Solo did not do well.
Okay. So
the last,
yeah,
and Solo to me feels like it would have a harder time fitting into this because of how important Solo is to the original trilogy and everything.
You would probably be right from what I remember.
Yeah. So this one is just. I think that the ending act of this movie is the most emotionally affecting of any Star Wars stuff. Like, as guys, the prequels fuck up everything. You think the prequels should be loaded for this kind of emotional resonance with like Anakin and Obi-Wan's final climactic battle. It doesn't, because everything falls flat on its face for that stuff. But this one of just the rebels fighting in a horribly undermatched battle where they're slowly getting picked off and dying throughout the whole thing, and you understand the stakes, and this is real like thematic or this is real like narrative tension to what's going on, and you want the timing to work out for them, and then they all die anyway. I think it's just like it's really satisfying in a way that the Jedi can't get across, because the Jedi are kind of cartoonish, and it ruins that effect. But I think it works really well here. I guess the ending was totally reshot too, so who knows what the original one was, but I like the ending that they ended up with.
Yeah. I loved it. I thought that the best death too was the droid. Like, I almost cried when the droid was. He's yelling at them to climb, and he's like doing his job right to the end. It was great.
The droid has, I think, the most convincing character arc in the entire movie.
He's my favorite droid. He's my favorite droid out of all the droids.
Definitely.
I think.
Yeah.
Well, so what? Not C-3PO.
Well, or
original 3 movie C-3PO.
Okay,
I will take C-3PO.
BB-8 is cute too.
Yeah.
The thing that really separates this, I think, from the other movies is that your final act of your normal Star Wars movie is just Wagnerian opera, where you've essentially got, people, the fat ladies up on the mountain singing and people sword fighting and shit.
Yeah.
And it's really big, and it's really like the emotion of it is really big. Oh, you're my father, but you're the most evil thing in the universe. You've cut my hand off, blah, 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 blah. This is a lot more personal and a lot more ground level. So I think it works in a completely different way than the other ones really do. And it allows for... It allows you to see, even though you're seeing in these other movies, in the first 3, well, I guess all of them, you're seeing people die. And Wes, we talk about this as far as like the Dominion War goes on Star Trek and stuff. Even though you're seeing people die in the action of the war, you're not really spending any time with these people. Like, you're not spending time with Porkins before he gets blown up in the X-Wing, or, whoever else. Wedge survives. Does Wedge survive? Wedge survives. Sure, they're people, they're casualties, but you're not spending any time with them. This is the first time you really spend time with people who fucking die.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Who are casualties of the war that is the Star War,
Yeah, no, that's true. They because they're not super powered over the rest of it. That right. they anyone can die. It's a very Game of Thronesy approach to it, I suppose, where anyone can die.
That's why Han Solo being trapped, and he doesn't even die. He gets frozen for half a movie,
right?
And it's like
they decide if they're going to re-sign Harrison Ford's contract.
It's the most devastating thing that's happened across 3 movies, because you've spent time with him. Obi-Wan Kenobi getting killed is devastating because you spent time with him.
Yoda dying is sad.
I would argue Yoda dying is the least sad death.
It's
for exactly the reason I'm talking about, where you don't spend that much time with Yoda, and also he just kind of dies. It's not like
he's old.
Yeah, it's not like a stormtrooper shows up and shoots him in the head or anything.
He doesn't. He can't self-terminate, and he asks Luke to do it for him or something. Do you either of you know what the original ending was for this? Like, was it drastically different? Does anyone know?
I don't.
I did some looking up, and it's fairly unclear. It sounds like there was a bunch so the most interesting thing that I read about this is the way that they made this movie, essentially, was before they had a script, Gareth Edwards and the editor got together and basically took a bunch of other sci-fi movies that they were taking influence from and cut them up and sort of pasted together a mock-up of what Rogue One was going to feel like, and to see how long scenes timed out for. So like to see how they used the scene from Aliens where they interrogate Ripley in place of the scene where the rebels interrogate Jyn, just to see how those scenes feel and how long they take and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How long it takes for a blast door to open, that kind of stuff. So they knew how long the movie was going to be. And then from that point, they kind of like started developing the visual style of it and the visual effects scenes and working those out. And then they kind of started writing the script, I guess.
Yeah.
So it was very much, and even the shooting of the movie, from what I read, was very much like, we're shooting the movie, but we're also going to shoot a bunch of other shit that we might not even use. Like the big thing with this is if you watch the first teaser trailer, none of the footage from that teaser trailer is actually in the movie.
Right.
And it's a bunch of really awesome looking stuff. And the editor said, yeah, that was just a bunch of stuff we shot on a whim and it looked cool, so we put it in the trailer. So it was kind of, even though the story is that it was a shit show and they had to bring somebody in to finish it, it sounds like it was very much sort of like a pastiche of building it anyway. And so the original ending, from what I've found, has was
Edwards fired during this? Or did they just reshoot it after it was wrapped?
I've never seen anywhere that he was actively fired.
Okay.
I've seen that what I read is that Tony Gilroy, who has a writing credit, basically because he did so much work on it, came in and after the director's cut, he came in and basically said, this is what's wrong with it, this is how we fix it. Wrote those scenes, they went out and shot them, and he was in a directing and or assistant directing capacity. So he did a lot of work on it, but he didn't necessarily, I don't think Gareth Edwards was officially fired or anything.
I'd have a hard time imagining any other ending for the movie.
Yeah. Well, I guess, that was the thing, because like they didn't, so one of the original things that they did, like original, was that we were coming up with ways for them not to all die, because they didn't think Disney and Lucasfilm were going to let them kill everybody. And so they had a sequence where I think they get out on a transport or something and they get off the planet. And then there was a different sequence where they get out off the planet, but they're being hunted down, and Cassian Andor sets off a carbonite bomb and freezes everybody.
Ooh.
Yeah, there was some really stupid shit. And there was one instance where what the fuck is his name? The bad guy. Carrick, yeah, or
Carrick or Nerrick or something like that.
Close enough. Ben Mendelsohn somehow survives. Krennic. He somehow survives the Death Star blast and is like trapped under rubble, and then Darth Vader shows up and chokes him to death.
Ooh.
Yeah. So it's like, it sounds like they were trying to thread a bunch of needles to try and please a bunch of people, and then Tony Gilroy came in and said, well, no, everybody's got to die. And so they kind of, and there was a lot of running, like originally the place they get the plans from and the word I'm looking for, the big tower, with the satellite dish on it.
Yeah, satellite dish.
Those were two different places, so they had to like run across the battlefield to get to that other place, which is really awkward action wise. So it was just a lot of like streamlining stuff, I think.
I mean, the running kind of feels to me like that is what Force Awakens would do. Like that's that kind of a Star Wars movie where it's like, because the characters are running in that a lot, well, like starships are shooting at them and things like that. So that adds to like the childish kind of like adventure story feel of those movies, and I think that this one's different. It just feels more adult, which is ridiculous to say because it is a fairy tale for children. But it's like, I can't imagine an ending where none of these characters die, because the entire point of the movie is to like do the right thing, sort of like they don't really, I wouldn't say that this movie is like particularly heavy-handed with its themes, or that it thinks like the theme is the most important thing that has to get across, but it is a sacrifice for the greater good in a way that the other Star Wars movies don't really do that, because it's more of a battle to the death between the light side and the dark side. This is the grayness of this just comes from the fact that it recognizes that neither of those are going to win for this cast of characters. Yeah,
sacrifice is not at the top of the list of things in mainline Star Wars movies generally.
No, No, that's out of Obi-Wan sacrifice or letting himself get cut in half.
That dude who took the A-wing into the Super Star Destroyer, man. That's one example.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I think the one big mistake is in this movie? This is kind of a sarcastic one big mistake, but the one thing that when it was over, I was like, that's the one scene I would have cut. I would cut all Vader scenes up until his final hallway appearance.
Agreed.
That Vader scene, especially watching it now, that Vader scene on Mustafar, it feels really tacked on.
Which one's that? The one where he just chokes out Krennic?
Yeah, where Krennic goes and like asks him about his promotion. Essentially.
Yeah, does the Emperor like me?
Yeah.
We've been talking for 36 minutes and we haven't talked about Krennic much. I thought he was an awesome bad guy.
He is outside of Vader. He's probably the strongest bad guy, I think.
He's definitely the most
layered, I think.
Yeah, everybody else ends up being. Well, I do really like Kylo Ren, but we'll say.
I like the Emperor. I mean, if we're talking about bad guys.
Sure, yeah. It remains to be seen where Kylo Ren's going to end up. But yeah, Krennic is
for not
solid.
Being a Sith apprentice, for not being a Sith guy, he is probably my favorite non-Force using villain that the series has.
He's what General Hux should be.
Yes.
Instead of just a fucking cartoon.
Well, yes. but Krennic has this nice undertow where Tarkin has taken his glory from him. It's like he has this weird, not weird, but he has this layer that a lot of Star Wars villains don't have, where he's actually been wronged, and you could potentially feel sympathetic for him if he wasn't such an asshole. Like he has a little arc that rides a narrative underneath everything, and it's unusual because most of them are just like fire the weapon, do this, that kind of stuff. But he's deeper than that. He has some sort of deep-seated insecurity about his position. He wants to meet the Emperor all the time. He wants everyone to tell the Emperor about what he's done. And so he's fascinating, and the performance is really strong, too. Mendelsohn's really excellent as that guy.
If I can just get back to the Darth Vader stuff. So I just have to say, I saw the movie in the theater about a month after it came out. And one of my coworkers said to me when she saw Rogue One, she's like, the only thing I'm going to tell you is that Darth Vader is awesome in that movie, and you are going to love the Darth Vader scenes. So the first 2 times you see Darth Vader, I thought those scenes were terrible and really forced. In the back of my head, I was like, this is a great movie, but what the hell was she talking about? and then it happens at the end.
Yeah. Which also not in the original script. That was a thing that they added later.
Great addition.
Yeah.
Well, it's so that ending is so strange because it is just a tag onto the movie. It's not you don't have the Vader scene where the main characters are running from Vader as he's kind of doing this, and I don't know if it is better or for worse or not doing it. I kind of like the fact that it's just these random rebel soldiers who are
100%.
trying to stop him. But at the same time, it feels weirdly unnecessary in a way to tag it on and then to have that horrible Uncanny Valley Princess Leia at the end, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I don't know. You guys thought it was fairly effective for a tag, and you wouldn't want to include Vader in more of the actual movie itself?
No. I think that this movie works best because it is removed from more or less removed from main character Star Wars stuff. Like, I don't think you gain anything from having Darth Vader be like the main heavy or something in this movie. You know?
Well, no, but say this is the solution. I'm more saying, like, when that Vader scene where he's chopping down the rebel soldiers is happening, it's because he is in like a hallway that at the end of it, Jin is at to get the plans off or something. Like, so they don't interact with him, but he is actually there with the main characters of our movie, even if he doesn't face off against them.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I prefer it that he's just kind of doing his own thing.
Jin's not on the ship, is she?
No.
At the
she's
end,
dead. Yeah, she's dead.
Yeah.
But I'm saying like Vader would go down to the planet or something like that.
I'm glad they didn't do that.
Yeah, I think that feels too forced. I think having those things just be separate and have the events of the story involve Jin, Andor, and Krennic, and then the Vader thing is very much like a for as much as people whine about fan service, there is nothing more fan servicey than that Darth Vader scene. Because like you said, it's a tag. There's no reason it needs to be there. And it's awesome.
It's awesome.
It's awesome. You can't watch that and go and like, poo-poo it because it's fan service.
Well,
so
I would say it does add something. It adds to what I was talking about earlier, where you see the difference in ability between Jedi and Sith and normal people. Like, because I don't think we've seen Vader do anything like that up until that.
No, never.
In the
and that's
suit.
why it's awesome.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of goes in line with what I was saying before, where they take recognizable Star Wars stuff and kind of present it in a new way, in a way that you haven't seen stuff before. Very high on that list is Darth Vader doing literally anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, he looks weird.
Vader?
In that final scene, he looks fine. In the Mustafar scene, his costume, I know that they went to like immense detail to replicate his look from A New Hope.
It doesn't hold up. His uniform does not hold up whatsoever.
Even down to his ill-fitting mask, where it's like, it looks like a Halloween mask because the neck is like sticking out.
Yeah.
They should have cleaned it up a little bit, I think. He's not really imposing looking in that scene.
The voice wasn't good.
Yeah. James Earl Jones sounds like he's
strange,
85, which he is.
Yeah. You know what I would say is a more fan servicey Vader scene, where when he's in his little rejuvenation bath.
Sure. Yeah, I guess that's
unnecessary. I don't know what the point of that scene is. It's just that people know that he's burnt, and so this is like a scene of you looking at him taking a bath or whatever he's doing. Because that doesn't tell you anything about Vader.
If we're talking about fan servicey stuff, the one thing, I know, Dave, you mentioned, I can't remember if you mentioned it here or before we started, the thing where like one of the first shots in the movie is blue milk.
Yes.
The one that bothers me the most is that they just happened to run into Ponda Baba and the other weird guy.
Dr. Avazan.
He's a doctor?
He's a doctor.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Of what?
Torture? I don't know.
Who are these characters? Who are you talking about?
The guys from Star Wars, the first Star Wars movie. That the guy with the ball sack for a face that gets his arm cut off.
Yep. He's just got a nose that's weird. The ball sack for the face.
The other guy.
He does have a scrotum on his face. He's an Aqualish, Clay.
Excuse me. I'm sorry to be insensitive to the Aqualish people. But those guys, that's just completely random.
Yes. You know these faces. Yes. You know these ball sack faces. Yeah.
They don't dwell on it, though. That only lasts about 8 seconds,
it wasn't
and then
as
they're
bad.
gone. But
it wasn't
you're right.
as bad on rewatch as it was the first time. I think because it just stood out so much. Like, of all the people,
right? It was forced
because they have to get from here to Tatooine in like a day and a half.
So we're going to see them in 12 Star Wars movies, so he can say by A New Hope he's wanted in 12 systems.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. Oh, speaking of that,
it's like the Robert Ory of Star Wars. Yeah.
I feel like they have a real loose concept of distance in this movie. Because after the fight at Jeddah, when they hook up with Saul Guerra's people, they walk from Jeddah, the city, to Saul Guerra's place, which looks like it's about 200 miles, in about 10 minutes.
Yeah,
and they do that again later when they're at the planet where Jin's father is, when they're setting up to kill him, and it's like Andor is at least 200 yards away, if not more, and he makes it over there in like 5 minutes. So I guess movie stuff, whatever you give, but
it's the same as Discovery, right? Where the pace and the scripting of these movies has amplified itself so much that they have to planet jump all the time. Yeah. So you can't deal with distance in any kind of like realistic way.
In the Jeddah thing, you run into a problem because Saul Guerra has to be on Jeddah. Your people have to go to him, but they have to be far enough away from the city that they don't instantly get destroyed when it gets Death Starred.
Right.
So they have to be able to see it across the ocean because, I don't know if you noticed, Dave, but there was no observable curve on that planet. But
you saw it from space. Star Wars does the lie.
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we talk about Saw Gerrera?
Sure.
What a pointless character with a bizarre performance attached to him.
Yeah. The performance is definitely like, I got to find something to do here.
And what's he supposed to be? He's supposed to be a shitty version of Vader? He's supposed to be like a rebel version of Vader where he's like this clunky robot guy?
I always took it as it was supposed to be like sort of the not an equivalent, but like someone on the rebel side who had the same sort of body transformation as Vader did, but was also a little bit more because he's sort of like a gray area character, right?
Yeah, he's the terrorist of the Rebel Alliance.
Yeah.
So I loved the character, and I loved Forest Whitaker. I thought he had a real weird performance, and I thought it worked. But Mon Mothma, we haven't talked about her either. Mon Mothma was great. I really liked seeing her.
Same actress doing the voice from the original movies.
No kidding.
I believe so.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I liked her a lot, but she described Saw Gerrera as somebody who is not Rebel affiliated, and they've gotten in a lot of trouble. In my own headcanon, Mon Mothma's lying in that scene, and he's just a straight up Rebel asset that is a terrorist and, kind of a villain.
Yeah.
And he does things like drive people insane with his giant alien squid thing.
That's the only bad thing he does in the movie, right? We don't see him kill anybody or anything, right?
No, but his forces in the city are pretty reckless.
They establish him as a terrorist.
Yeah.
Okay. So to get him straight, he is sort of like bombing Empire facilities and not caring if normal civilians die in it. Is that what we're supposed to assume about him?
I think so, more or less, yeah.
So he's just kind of like a loose cannon, basically?
In my headcanon, no. He's the admission that, a rebellion is a dirty, irregular war, and you need guys like Saw Gerrera to fuck shit up and stir shit up in places like Jeddah.
Yeah,
and that's why I liked him.
So you're saying he's more of like an off the record Black Ops kind of guy who's doing the wet work. Not as classy as that, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
He's getting thrown under the bus by the.
He's an IRA guy.
Yeah,
I love him.
Yeah. See, everything that you just said is awesome, and I like that a lot. But I think his use in the movie is just so weird, and he's one of those things where I feel like they could have. I'm not sure how you do it, but I feel like they could have condensed some moving around or something to give him more space and more time with him or something. Because it is kind of as far. Let's put it this way: as far as characters who show up, and we'll talk about this in the next one too. As far as characters who show up for like one or two scenes and then are gone, I like this guy a lot more than Benicio del Toro in The Last Jedi. But it's the same kind of feeling for me where it's like he's very much a transitional character that feels like he should get more time and have more weight to him, but they just don't have it.
Well, he's so important to the story, but you see very little screen time.
They talk about him a lot. Yeah, they talk about him a lot.
I mean, Jyn gets found by him at the very start. Her parents know him, and he rescues her from hiding in her cave hole for a while. And then you're supposed to learn that she was mentored and raised by him, but the next time we see her is as an adult, and she's a prisoner in that prison camp. So you see no...
And even there, they haven't seen each other in like 10 years or something.
Yeah, she says that he abandoned her
when she was like 16.
Yeah.
Probably to do some dirty bombings.
So yes.
For how referenced he is, it's strange because he's brought up constantly by all these characters. He has a direct input on our main character, but I could easily see him being totally cut from the script and nothing changes about it.
Yeah, he's weird because he has all of this connection to the character you're talking about. We don't see a lot of it. And the main purpose for him in the story is to be the hub where everything kind of comes together to start the story going. Right. Because he even says it in the movie where the defector pilot shows up and gives him the message from Galen. And then Jyn just happens to show up the same day, and he's like, "What is this? Is it my birthday or something? This has to be a trap because both of you showed up at the same time." Like even he is kind of acknowledging that it's weird that all of this is happening at the same time.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know how you would change that.
I mean, you just have the rebels capture the pilots and bring them to their rebel base. But I think the only reason he seems to exist is because they need to get them onto that planet so they can blow up that planet.
Sure. So, okay, if we're going to spitball how we would change this, I think you're right. I think you could keep you could have the rebellion get the pilot and then the rebellion catches up with Jyn while she's on Jeddah doing something that's like where they find her for the first time or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you do for the first 15 minutes of the movie, but
well, you could also have, because I think that Cassian's turn where he's like, I'm a good soldier, I'm going to execute your father, and then he gets there and he doesn't shoot him. You could have Cassian kill Saw Gerrera, I think. Right? To show this kind of schism between the two, where he kills Saw Gerrera and then he kind of realizes about the father later on. It gives like a little bit of development to that role. I don't know how it wouldn't necessarily fit into the script as they've got it now, but I think that the turn of Cassian feels very rushed to me because he doesn't have anyone to sort of be the bad guy to in the first place, and then to repent later with another character.
I think what you're talking about is exactly why they wrote it, because the first scene with Cassian where he shoots the dude, that was also an addition, a post first edit edition.
Oh, was it?
So if you can imagine this movie existed in its first version without the scene where Cassian shoots that guy, and without them finding Jyn in prison and saving her from prison. So the two
and everyone lives at the end.
Yeah, and everybody lives at the end.
Yeah, this is a bad movie.
Yeah, it's a bad movie. So you take your two characters who are barely hanging on by a thread as far as being interesting characters in the finished movie, and take away the two things that make them interesting, and then make them your main characters.
Yeah, that's interesting, because we just talked about it, but I had forgotten that Cassian shoots that guy. I feel he needs to kill someone more important, I guess, is my problem.
Sure,
and Saw Gerrera would be that character.
Yeah,
because the rebels obviously don't like Saw Gerrera, right? Like they would want
I don't
him
know.
to be.
According to Dave, it sounds like they like him a lot.
That is an unchallenged assumption in the movie that Mon Mothma's just lying. He's a rebel. He's just doing the dirty stuff for them, so Mon Mothma can stay clean.
Yeah, if they had said that in the movie, and so they set it up so Mon Mothma pulls him aside and he's like, "Listen," because they like exposition in this movie. Listen, I know that Saw Gerrera is one of our guys, and what he's doing is completely sanctioned by the rebellion, but you need to take him out, or something like that. That would give me a little bit more to work with. But they kind of
his full name is Osama Gerrera.
Ouch.
They kind of do that. It's tough because they kind of do that with the dad, right? Because they have that scene where they're all getting in to fly off. And the guy pulls him aside, and he's like, "Listen, kill Galen Erso.
Yes,
don't bring him back.
Right.
Kill him." So yeah, I guess I know what you're saying, but I feel like with the people who are available, like as the story goes now, having Cassian kill Saw doesn't really add much because he gets blown up 2 scenes later anyway.
I need something to happen with the characters, because the characters to me are the weakest part of this movie.
That's totally fine. Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah.
I need the first hour of this. I was not sure that I liked this movie all that much, because it felt sort of like a more grounded version of Star Wars that wasn't really doing anything for me. I think the ending fixes a lot of that. It's really a movie that relies on the ending, and you just sort of like realize what's going to happen to these characters to really appreciate it. But at the same time, there's about 3 too many characters in the start, and none of them are really. I just feel like it's one of those movies where you could combine a lot of these characters and have their roles overlap with each other, and you would cut down on the amount of characters you need to have on screen, and they can kind of accomplish the same. Like, you could have the pilot also be Cassian, you know what I mean? Or something like that. Sure. Like, there's no reason to separate them out so much that you have just the pilot who does this thing, and the droid who does this thing, and then there's a blind wannabe Jedi guy, and then there's the guy with the Gatling gun who's his friend. Like, it feels like there's just too many characters stuck into it.
That being said, they managed to give them all really good deaths.
They did, yeah.
They did.
Yeah.
I thought the pilot's death was the best one because it was not heroic.
How does he die? He did just a grenade in the plane.
Yeah,
right? A grenade in the plane, and he looks at it and kind of looks sad, and then he's gone.
Yeah, a lot of grenade deaths in this.
The same face I'd make before getting blown up by a grenade.
Well, that's it.
And what's the, for my own canon sensibility, what is the warrior monk? He's a wannabe Jedi? Is that kind of his thing?
That's a creation of Rogue One.
Yeah.
Is it?
So, okay, one thing that this movie does well, that I think that Star Wars as a brand does well, is not trying to do science fiction per se proper.
Yes, correct.
They set up a world and they give you throwaway lines. Like even from the first 3 movies, how you travel in space is throwaway lines. Sometimes they call it light speed. Sometimes they call it hyperspace. It's for the fans afterwards to create. And I think that's why Star Wars is partially so successful, is because the world, the greater cinematic universe that you can build out of it, has all these loose ends that you can do what you want with.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like assuming that Saw Gerrera is a character that they never explained, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's what they did really well with these Jedi, or pseudo Jedi, is they give it to them. They're protectors of the temple. We know that the Jedi are somehow connected to the temple because they built their lightsabers out of the same kyber.
Yeah, the crystal that powers everything. It's like the dilithium
Exactly.
crystal of Star Wars, yeah.
Yep.
But then they leave it there. So he's got some force sensitivity, but he's not a Jedi. He's definitely not as powerful as a Jedi, and they don't get into it. And I think that's why, this whole like doing sci-fi proper or not doing sci-fi proper, I think that Rogue One admits it's not going to try it, whereas the prequels tried that, and they tried to explain the force with we all know about midichlorians.
Yeah, there's a real schism, it seems, in the brand itself as to whether or not the force is a like tangible thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you have some interpretations of it going more the midichlorian route, where it's like it's essentially a magical staph infection.
It's genetic. It's genetic. It runs in families.
Genetic.
Yeah,
it runs in the family. There's quote unquote science attached to it, but you've got other ways where
Qui-Gon Jinn has 23andMe on his ship.
Yes.
He's got his little blood sugar diabetes meter where he's like, just look, the midichlorians are off the charts.
Yes. But you've got the other way, which is really the more original way that it's treated, which is more of it's a force. It's not a thing, it's a force. And there's more of a mystical aspect and more of a Zen sort of thing.
It's a religion that you come to.
Yeah, it's a religion that has, literal magic powers attached to it, but it's a religion. So and this movie definitely goes that way with it, which I think is really the way to go, because as soon as you start making things tangible and literal, then it really hampers the stories you can tell. And when you've got a character like these monk dudes who are, like you said, Dave, not Jedi, but they're definitely involved somehow, and they're force sensitive.
And one of them and one of them doesn't even believe in the force anymore.
They said he was like the most
devout,
celebrated monk, and then all of a sudden he's not anymore. I want to know more about that story.
Well, right, and they just leave it loose, right?
Yeah.
But here's my question to you: if you give the blind monk a lightsaber, is he not a Jedi at that point? Like, what I have a problem where I feel there needs to be a kind of defining line between the Jedi and not being a Jedi. So for me, what I kind of like about the midichlorians, as ridiculous as they are and nonsensical as they are,
I knew you were going to go there,
is that they do give this hard sense of there is a definite thing to be a Jedi. Like there's a definite, you have to be this thing in order to control the Force. And it's not just kind of like a religious awakening that you can have, that you can all of a sudden become a Force user. Like it seems like you're born with it or you're not. And to me, in the fantasy world, that seems more like it's appropriate for Star Wars kind of thing, where it's like some people just can. But the original sensibility of it, correct me if I'm wrong, seems to be like more just if you accept it like this blind monk did, if you just like embrace the Force, you will be able to become a user of it. And I don't know if that works for me as well.
I think that's the assumption in Rogue One, I would assume. And I'll push back a little bit because, like, does Luke Skywalker ever become a Jedi? You want a clear definition, but in the first 3 movies, it's not clear whether he's a Jedi or not. He is decidedly and definitely not a Jedi through the first half of Return of the Jedi. Mm-hmm. And then you can make the decision, like, is he a Jedi after
There's the scene where he's like, I did it. I am a Jedi. And the Emperor's like, no, you're fucking not.
I want to see some signed paperwork if you're going to start calling yourself a Jedi. Yeah.
You want a certificate.
Yes.
Some credentials.
I'm just remembering how silly that is. In the middle of this battle for the universe, he stops to go, I did it. I'm a Jedi like my dad. And the Emperor's like, hey, over here, guy. No, we're not done here yet.
Yeah. I don't have a problem. I like the idea of a character who's kind of like trying to be a Jedi but can't actually do it. And I think that you can approach his death scene as a symbolic, like maybe he's not using the Force, he just wasn't getting shot. But here's my question to you before we head out of here. Was there a bigger mistake in the prequels than trying to retcon or say that the stormtroopers were clones of one of the most elite bounty hunters in the universe? Has that ever backfired? Is there something that backfired more than trying to make that connection where it's your thing, Clay, about in your sequel, you can either have more of something or make the one thing more powerful. Mm-hmm. But the stormtroopers...
But you can't do both because that's too hard.
Right. The stormtroopers are supposed to be both, though. They're supposed to be this elite bounty hunter fighter who actually stood off against Obi-Wan. He stood off against a Jedi and survives.
Sure.
And there's supposed to be a billion of them constantly coming at you. And they're so cocky that when they come out of their buildings, they don't try to hide immediately. They just walk out and get shot, and they don't even give a fuck about it.
So do we know that those clones were actually like well done clones? Because I mean, like, you know, you're those long neck dudes. You're trying to get a government contract. You're showing that you can do it. You're just not showing that
you're showing your best product.
Yeah, you're showing your best like 50. You're not showing the other ones in the back who are just like walking into a wall repeatedly, like the guys from Us.
Well, to be fair, the best that Obi-Wan sees, they're all sitting in a row eating cereal, I think, when he looks at them.
That's all they can do. That's the one skill they've learned how to do.
In that room, we have soldiers. In this room, we have cereal eaters.
There are fewer in the soldier room.
It really sticks out to me as a weird, bad decision that they made.
The thing that I've always wondered though is that, I mean, I guess that's the implication, but is that hard canon that the stormtroopers are all clones? Because they're not in the new movies, obviously, because Finn is one of them. But I mean, well, unless they're clones of somebody else, but I always thought like maybe the quality level dipped off because all the clones got killed after 30 years.
They lost their supply. I don't know.
Yeah, you know, you got to restock them somehow.
Yeah, I don't.
But I know what you're saying. However, I also would like to kind of piggyback off of that slightly and say I may have said this on another show, I don't remember. Is there a more useless thing in a sci-fi movie than body armor? Because the Mandalorian is the first person who has effective sci-fi body armor. Everybody else in this movie, there's a scene where one of them gets dirt kicked in his face and he reacts as though someone threw acid at him.
That's
and
true.
Again, the Ewoks and the Stormtroopers, like they're throwing rocks at him. They're not doing anything.
They get beat to death by a stick in this movie. Donnie Yen beats these guys to death with a stick.
They also, I think this Star Wars has the most characters getting shot by a blaster and surviving from it.
Yeah, a lot of off-center mass shooting in this
one.
Yeah,
a lot of limbs getting shot and people going like, oh, Jesus, and then kind of surviving through it. But yeah, it's certainly not as deadly a blaster as we've seen in previous movies. Tech is not up to par.
Before we wrap up, can we talk a bit about Tarkin and Leia?
Oh, let's end it with that, actually. What do you guys think about that?
Okay. I have a very strong opinion that it's hard. I didn't like it. Tarkin was the first time you see it, and it felt and looked exactly like a dialogue scene from like a Fallout-style RPG game.
Yeah.
Where he's talking, and I was waiting for like him to just stare at you and start blinking and 4 dialogue boxes to pop up and you pick.
Yeah.
As he kind of like moves in a wobble as he's just standing there on the screen. Yeah.
At the end, Krennic picks "I will not fail" (leave conversation) and walks away.
I was surprised by how, for having not seen this movie, how much they talked up that. I was surprised by how bad it looked.
Yeah. So
it was. To finish though, it was awesome seeing Grand Moff Tarkin and using him as a character where he had a conflict with the main bad guy, and they're going back and they're both just petty assholes. It was great seeing Tarkin in the movie, and I don't know how else you do it because Peter Cushing he's got such an iconic look and voice.
Yeah.
The voice is an imitation, actually.
It is, of course, because he died in the 80s, but I don't know. If they had hired a different actor, it wouldn't have worked. I liked seeing Tarkin in it. I didn't like how it actually looked. Maybe just do him in a hologram and let him be petty over the phone.
Yeah.
But I liked seeing Tarkin in it.
Krennic keeps trying to get to talk to him, but he can never take the time to leave his office, so he keeps hologramming and sending like a guy out. It's like, Grand Moff Tarkin would like to tell you that he's very unhappy with what you're doing.
It's just emails back and forth. Like, it was cool. I really liked Tarkin in it, and I'm glad that they used him because they don't use him in much of anything else. He's kind of a forgotten character after New Hope.
Yeah, he really was.
Yeah. But I don't know how else you do it other than CGing.
I think you guys are. I think you've actually maybe convinced me, Dave, a little bit of like, now I'm starting to see the fan service that I wonder about it in it, because Tarkin's important, but he's really just important for Krennic's character development, right? Like he's the antagonist to Krennic in a lot of ways. He's like a secondary antagonist to him. But I don't know if he's 100% necessary in the movie for that. And I think that you could portray Krennic like that in a different way and have him just be the main villain and not have Tarkin be involved. I find it distracting to look at him. It's the only thing I can see when his scene is happening. I'm like, this is not a real person. Like, this is just fake.
Very much.
And I think that, like, it brings up weird ethical issues. Like, do you have to pay his family when you do this?
They did have to get at least approval. I don't know if they have to pay the family, but they had to get approval from the estate to use his likeness. Yeah.
I would, if I was a member of that estate, I would say you have to pay us for his likeness.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised, and this is where like it gets real world sci-fi weird and shit. It would not surprise me, especially because of how litigious and, you know, they lock up their stuff over at Disney, if there's some sort of copyright law that says that since what they're using is not Peter Cushing.
Oh, it's the character.
But they're using the character of Grand Moff Tarkin, then they don't actually have to pay anything.
Sure, probably that's how it works for action figures and stuff like that, too.
Because his likeness as that character is technically owned by Disney, which is kind of fucked up. But, you know, I love seeing Tarkin. I mean, seeing Peter Cushing in a movie in 2016 is just awesome, as weird as it is. I think if they made that, as far as going back and touching up, special effects, that's one I wish they would go back and touch up, because if they made that movie now, I guarantee you it would look almost photorealistic, because that technology, they've been using that technology since Tron Legacy, when it was not great.
Yeah.
And it's gotten better every time they've done it. And most recently, it's been used in the most recent Terminator movie, and it is the best I have ever seen it. And it was like disturbingly good. And so I think if they had made that movie this year, I guarantee you he looks 100 times better.
Is Leia necessary?
No.
I don't think it's necessary to see her face. I think they could have done that one without CGIing her in.
Having her just turn around and say, "Hope."
Yeah. Like, you mean, the shot that they use where they open the door and you see the back of her, that's obviously that's Princess Leia, right?
Yeah.
Are you saying, is she necessary to be in there at all? Because I don't know that she is.
No, I would have just done it without her turning around. Just see the back of her robed, silhouette or whatever, and hear her voice say "hope" or something like that. And I think that would have been enough. Tarkin's tougher because he's more important to it, but I think that I would not have done it for either of them. I don't think. Maybe as you're saying nowadays when the technology catches up, but just looking at it is just distracting.
I was thinking whether or not Leia is necessary at all, in like the character to be in there at all, face or not. And I kind of feel like she is, because you need to have that beat where you know that the plans have reached where they need to go.
Yeah, that they've won.
What I mean?
It's not a tragic ending.
Yeah, and if you hand it off to like Jimmy Smits, it's not going to have the same impact as if you hand them off to Princess Leia, you know?
Yeah, no, 100%.
Did they CG the whole Imperial, the board? So there are like boardroom scenes on the Death Star in A New Hope when Darth Vader chokes out I don't know what he is, an admiral. Did they CG that whole crowd? Because I'm thinking of Wes's point, whoever Darth Vader chokes out and he says, "I find your lack of faith disturbing." That guy could have taken the Grand Moff Tarkin character role, and you wouldn't have had to CG him. You could get a different actor because
I see what you mean.
what that guy
Yeah.
looks like.
Yeah, but see, again, I think the reason that they used Tarkin is because he is more or less shorthand as to what the stakes are.
Yes.
Right? Because it's the same. He kind of serves the same purpose as Princess Leia, where it's like as soon as you see him, you know who he is, who he's working for, and why it's a big deal. Whereas if it was Krennic going up to like the next guy in line, which is just another guy in a black hat, it doesn't quite have the same punch as if it's Grand Moff Tarkin doing it.
Interesting. I see Tarkin as the character who matches the trait about these are characters who go to extremes. Like Saw Gerrera is Tarkin's analog, I think, because you know that Tarkin is going to be the one who doesn't hesitate to just blow up Alderaan or something.
Sure.
Like he's that character. Where Krennic, I don't think they even flesh out Krennic this way, but you could feel that I could see the argument that Krennic has more of a moral problem with using the Death Star than Tarkin does. I don't think they ever play it that way, but I could easily see him being drawn in a way that is similar to that. They kind of give him more of a psychological hang-up about being needy or something. But I think Tarkin is supposed to be that guy who's going to do the extreme thing. And these are all characters who sort of revolve around being extremer versions of one another.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but the opposite of like Saw Gerrera. So as you said earlier, there's kind of a theme of selflessness on the rebel side. And it's just the opposite with Krennic and Tarkin, where they're both just careerist people that are trying to get themselves to the top.
Yeah.
So there is a juxtaposition. You're right. They'll do anything for it, but where one side is selfless, the other side, it's just bureaucrats trying to get to the top.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Anything else we want to talk about here?
Well, I would just want to ask, so this movie is a prequel to Star Wars.
Yes.
In the same way, even more literally, than the prequel trilogy is. Why does this work? Considering that it has a lot of the same stuff that we criticize in the prequel trilogy as far as like, did we really need to see Chewbacca? Did we really need to see this? Do they need to tie this up? Do we really need to know why the Emperor's face is wrinkled? Which is, I'm dying on that hill is the stupidest thing they've ever explained. Why does Rogue One work, but the prequel trilogy does not?
It's smarter. I think for me, Rogue One it's a smarter movie, and we had talked about just like the sci-fi aspects of it. It knows that it's a Star Wars movie and doesn't try to be more than that. And I think George Lucas, with his prequels, tried to be a little more than that.
Yeah.
He tried to tie everything up and make a complete enclosed story, a closed system kind of story where Star Wars shouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird that after you have the original trilogy and you come out with something like Rogue One, you could say that Rogue One is actually kind of a failure of a movie in that it doesn't try to do anything different with Star Wars. It just kind of like it does a little tweak to it, but it feels more like Star Wars than the prequels. What's funny is that Lucas tried to do something different with the prequels, but he fucked it up so badly that everyone's like, this is just awful. Where it's almost more artistically unusual and artistically ballsy to do what Lucas did with the prequels than anything.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah.
And one thing that, I'll give Lucas credit for, and I kind of learned this after we were doing our podcast on this a couple of years ago, is Lucas didn't really listen to the fans. Everybody complained about Phantom Menace, and he kind of gave the finger and was like, no, I'm going to do it my way, which is really good. And as we start talking about the Disney sequels, we're going to see that doing the opposite can be worse, I think, when you listen to the fans and react too much to your own criticism. But another reason that Rogue One is better than the actual prequels, the acting.
Yeah. Yes.
Flat out.
I mean, it sounds like a stupid answer to Clay's question, but I just think they're better movies. Like almost every aspect of it, like the cinematography, the acting, the scripting, is just a better version than what the prequels were. I
think Rogue One might be the best looking Star Wars movie there is. It's beautiful, and like the way that they, again, it looks really good for this reason, but there's also a bit of a nostalgia thing to it as well, where like they match the look of the original one so well to the point where they even cut in footage from the first movie during the X-wing scenes, and it's seamless.
Hmm.
They actually found unused dailies from A New Hope of the
No kidding.
Yeah, and so they cut in those, and they actually brought in Gold Leader to do a little bit new dialogue to go over it because he was still alive. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's beautiful as far as like compositionally, not even just like photography wise, just like the compositions in this are amazing. The look of it is great. Everything feels really lived in. And it's so weird that the prequels, it took me a long time to realize why they look the way they do. And part of it is because, I mean, maybe this is headcanon for me, I don't know, but I always assumed that the prequels look the way they do because they're supposed to be pre-Empire. So everything is supposed to be nicer looking.
Yeah.
You know, a little bit more upscale and classier and not as rough and grungy. But it is so antiseptic in those movies that that plus the amount of CGI that they use really makes you creates this huge distance from being, and also the terrible acting creates this huge distance where you can't, it's really difficult for me anyway to latch on and care about these characters in the way that you're supposed to. Whereas in Rogue One, there's barely any character work, and by the end, I'm like, "Fuck, man, that Jedi monk!
Why'd they have to kill the droid?"
Yeah, the way that he looked at that grenade, man, it says it all. You know, it's really fascinating because even this one, it's a closed loop in this one, the way it's a closed loop in the prequel trilogy, right? Yeah. You know, the prequel trilogy comes almost as close to tying up things as this does, where like it ends with Jimmy Smits taking the twins on the ship. What's the name of the ship?
Jimmy Smits is in Rogue One too, and we didn't talk about that. That is a completely needless.
Sure
scene.
is, but he does do the linkage between like it's him, that's Leia's stepfather, blah 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 blah.
Sure.
And also, I do have to say, if you're gonna do a callback to the prequel trilogy, he's not the worst one to do.
Sure.
You know what my prequel callback would have been actually?
What's that?
When they're at the end and they see the nuclear explosion going off, and Jin and what's the guy's name? Cassian are there when they're laying on the beach. You should say, "You know what I hate about sand?" Gets everywhere.
Just completely blow him up. But like the prequel trilogy ends with Jimmy Smits on the ship, which is what's the name of the ship that Leia's on at the beginning of the
Tantive 4
or something like that. Yeah, they
Tantive
rebuilt
4,
that because they're trying to close that loop as much as possible, and Rogue One actually closes that even tighter and does it better because it is not as forced as it is in the prequels, which is just like it's the most forced closing of a loop I've ever seen in my life. But
yeah. No, I really like this movie. Or I wouldn't say I really like this one. I like this one much more than I thought I was going to. It surprised me by how well it sits in the pantheon of Star Wars movies, I think, for me. And I'm slowly being convinced that Star Wars can exist outside of the Skywalkers. I don't know how well it can exist outside of like the Force and things at this point, but I think you can certainly exist outside of the Jedi and the Empire and the Emperors and stuff. This one has the Empire in it, but it was stuff like the Mandalorian and just like the baby steps that this one took away from that kind of material. I think there is room for it to go in that direction. I was skeptical about that, but I think there is potential for it.
I would also like to say, because we don't have to talk about it, but I hate the theme song for this. The incidental music is fine, but the theme just sounds like really stock sci-fi, Star Wars ripoff music.
Was this the first one that Williams didn't do?
Yes.
Okay.
And I know it's not entirely at the fault of the composer, who is generally a very good composer. Michael Giacchino, he did the music for the 2009 Star Trek series.
He's done a ton of movies, obviously.
Yeah. The 2009 Star Trek is a fantastic theme. But I guess there was another composer whose name I forget, who his music was scored to the original version of the movie, and it didn't work with the new cut. So they had to bring in Michael Giacchino with only a month to write and record an entire new score for this movie. So I'll give him a little bit of leeway, but I don't like the fanfare theme for this.
I noticed in the I had to watch some of it with subtitles, and when Vader enters, the subtitle says Vader's theme plays, which is interesting. Yeah, that's obviously to show you how important the music is to this series and everything like that, and the sound effects and everything like that. But Dave, any final takeaways from this one?
No crawl in the beginning. We didn't mention that. It was great. It kicked right off.
Yeah.
Right
Do
on
they
the planet.
head fake you?
It shows.
No, they don't even, right? They
It shows an establishing shot on a planet, because I think all Star Wars movies start in space.
I think so, yeah.
After the crawl, but there's no crawl, and then it just goes right into the story. And seeing that in the theater, that was the first. I was expecting an opening crawl, and that they didn't give it to me got me a little excited. It got me going.
Yeah. Also, we didn't even talking about using familiar stuff in new ways. We didn't talk about the Hammerhead ship, which was fucking awesome.
Oh my God, yeah, that was great.
It was amazing. And how as the rebels are running away, they use the coming out of Lightspeed to just blow a bunch of them up, because they just pop out of Lightspeed.
Yeah.
And so as the rebels are going away, the Star Destroyer shows up and just runs into a bunch of them. That stuff is great.
Even that planetary shield, the Spaceballs shield.
The Spaceball shield.
They had the Spaceballs shield, and but it was great. It wasn't hokey. It worked.
It worked. Set to suck, not blow.
I think that's it. We're done with Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. I think our next one is the next one Last Jedi? It is, right? It's not Solo. Next one's Last Jedi. So everyone's very anxious for our thoughts about Last Jedi.
After we finish Solo, I think the three of us should go
blow our brains out.
opening weekend to the new one and podcast from in the theater and just really annoy everybody who's there.
A live show.
That's okay with me.
Yeah, we're done. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. Thank you for supporting us. We'll be back with The Last Jedi, which will be the next one, and then Solo, and then it's Rise of Skywalker after that. So thank you very much for listening. Dave Clay, thank you very much for talking about Star Wars, and we will be back in a couple weeks, I suppose, with the next one. I'll say that, and we'll have to stick to it. So see ya.